They denied his first-class seat. 12 minutes later, he grounded the plane. He walked through the airport with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, carrying nothing but a sleek leather briefcase, he looked like any other business traveler. But in just a few minutes, everyone in that terminal would know he wasn't just another passenger. At the gate, heads turned, some with admiration, others with suspicion. The whispers started before he even reached the boarding line. He ignored them. He had long ago mastered the art of pretending not to hear. For him, success had never erased the sting of judgment that came with the color of his skin. When his boarding group was called, he approached calmly, handed over his ticket, and prepared to settle into the first-class seat he had rightfully paid for. But that's when the air shifted. The gate agent paused. Her eyes flickered up and down, scanning him as though he didn't belong. Then came the words, sharp, dismissive, and heavy with the kind of prejudice he had endured his entire life. "Sir, this seat isn't for you." At first, he thought it was a mistake, a simple mix-up, easily fixed. But the way she looked at him told a different story. Passengers behind him stared, some smirked, others filmed with their phones. The humiliation spread across his face like fire, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. Denied the seat he had worked so hard for, he was asked to step aside. Just 12 minutes later, those same people who laughed, who doubted, who dismissed him, would watch in disbelief as he made a single phone call that brought the entire plane to a standstill. The engines shut down. The pilot stepped off. And the man they thought was just another passenger revealed the truth about who he really was. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about power, prejudice, and the moment arrogance collided with reality. The question is, what happens when the man you try to humiliate holds your future in his hands? For Marcus Reynolds, mornings began the same way no matter where in the world his work took him. A cup of black coffee, a quick review of his day's agenda, and a quiet moment where he reminded himself of the journey that brought him here. Born in a small working-class neighborhood, Marcus had grown up surrounded by people who told him the odds were stacked against him. He had heard it all. Too poor, too black, too ambitious. But each doubt, each barrier, became fuel. He didn't just want to succeed, he wanted to redefine what success looked like. Now, decades later, he was one of the youngest CEOs of a global aviation and logistics company, a man who had built his empire from determination, intellect, and resilience. His schedule was relentless: board meetings in New York, investor pitches in London, government contracts in Dubai. Yet despite the prestige, Marcus carried himself with humility. He never forgot where he came from, and he never stopped seeing how the world treated people who looked like him. This trip was no different. He was flying to finalize a deal that could expand his company into new markets, something that would create thousands of jobs and strengthen his legacy. His team had already flown ahead. He had stayed behind to attend a community event in his hometown. The irony wasn't lost on him. After giving scholarships to underprivileged kids, he was now boarding a flight that would test not only his patience but his identity. The airport was buzzing with the usual rhythm of travel, families juggling luggage, business people typing furiously on laptops, kids dragging stuffed animals through security lines. Marcus moved through it with practiced ease, dressed in his tailored suit, polished shoes clicking against the tile. People noticed him, some with admiration, recognizing the quiet authority in his stride, others with suspicion, their eyes narrowing as if asking, "What's he doing here?" When he reached the gate, he felt the subtle shift. He handed his first-class ticket to the attendant, a young woman whose smile faltered the moment she looked up. Her eyes scanned him quickly, then darted to the line behind him. Marcus had seen that look before. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about him. Still, he kept calm. Years of boardrooms had taught him the power of composure. But in that stillness, memories flashed back of being followed in department stores as a teenager, of having his credentials questioned in meetings where he was the only black man in the room, of hearing the word "sir" laced with condescension. This was different only in setting, not in essence. Behind him, the line grew restless. A businessman in a gray suit sighed loudly. A couple of college kids giggled and whispered. Phones began to lift, cameras quietly recording. Marcus stood still, refusing to shrink under the weight of their stares. The attendant's voice came, sharp and rehearsed. "Sir, this seat isn't for you. Please step aside." It wasn't just a denial. It was an accusation wrapped in politeness. It suggested he didn't belong, that no matter what the ticket said, no matter how much money he had paid, his very presence was suspect. Marcus felt the sting, but he didn't argue. Not yet. He stepped aside, his mind racing, not with anger, but with clarity. Because Marcus Reynolds was not just a passenger. He was the man who signed the contracts, who oversaw the pilots' licenses, who determined which airlines received government approvals and which didn't. And, in just a few minutes, every person watching would discover that fact in the most shocking way possible. The boarding area grew quieter than Marcus expected, though the silence was laced with whispers. People weren't looking at the gate attendant anymore, they were looking at him. A tall black man in a tailored suit, holding a first-class ticket, standing to the side like a trespasser waiting to be escorted out. Marcus kept his posture steady, his hands clasped lightly in front of him. On the outside, he radiated calm. On the inside, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the battle between indignation and restraint. He knew how quickly perceptions could shift. A raised voice, a single defensive word, and suddenly he would be labeled the problem. The attendant cleared her throat. "Sir, I'm asking you again. Please wait. This line is for our priority passengers." Her voice was louder now, deliberately audible to everyone within range. Marcus didn't move. Slowly, he raised the ticket again, his voice even. "This is a first-class boarding pass, purchased through my account, assigned to this flight. I belong here." The attendant didn't look at the ticket this time. Instead, she glanced past him to the next traveler, waving them forward as if Marcus were invisible. A man in his 40s, salt and pepper hair, expensive briefcase, stepped around Marcus with a smirk. "Don't take it personally," he whispered, loud enough to be heard. "Rules are rules." The words weren't rules, they were daggers. Behind him, someone muttered, "Probably tried to sneak into first class." Another voice added, "You know how it is." Laughter followed. Marcus felt the stares harden. In that moment, the crowd wasn't neutral. They were witnesses aligning themselves with the narrative being written against him, that he didn't belong, that his presence was suspicious, that his money, his ticket, his achievements, none of it mattered against the color of his skin. He breathed deeply. Patience was his shield, composure, his armor. But the humiliation was real, and the wound was cutting deeper with every passing second. Finally, a supervisor emerged, a middle-aged man with a stiff posture and a rehearsed smile that never reached his eyes. "Sir, I understand there's some confusion here," he began, though his tone suggested otherwise. "This cabin is fully booked. I'm afraid we'll need you to step aside while we sort this out." Marcus studied the man. He could tell this wasn't about logistics. It was about perception. They hadn't checked the system, hadn't scanned the boarding pass again. They had already decided. "I'll wait," Marcus said quietly. "But I won't move until you verify that seat, because I earned it. I paid for it. And I'm not going to vanish just because it makes someone else comfortable." The supervisor stiffened, his jaw tightening. Around them, passengers shifted uneasily, sensing tension rise. Some pulled out their phones, recording discreetly. A teenager whispered, "This is about to go viral." Then came the final blow before boarding. The pilot himself stepped into the gate area. Tall, uniform pressed to perfection, he exuded authority. The crowd seemed to lean toward him, expecting resolution. "Is there an issue here?" the pilot asked the attendant. "Yes," she said quickly. "This gentleman is attempting to board first class, but his ticket doesn't match." Marcus felt the sting. It wasn't just a denial anymore. It was an accusation of dishonesty. The pilot's eyes swept over Marcus, lingering in that way Marcus had seen 1,000 times before, assessing, doubting, reducing. Then, with the dismissive confidence of someone who thought he owned the sky itself, the pilot said, "Sir, if you can't comply, we'll have to remove you from this flight." Gasps rippled through the gate. The crowd wasn't sure whether to side with authority or recoil at the blatant injustice. Cameras were definitely rolling now. The air was thick with tension, every breath heavy with unspoken judgment. Marcus's heart thudded, but his face betrayed nothing. He had dealt with arrogance before, but never with such public, casual cruelty. And the irony was bitter. This pilot had no idea who he was speaking to. Because Marcus Reynolds wasn't just another passenger, he wasn't just another businessman, he was the man who owned the contracts this airline depended on. And in less than 12 minutes, the world would see just how much power he truly held. The silence after the pilot's words was suffocating. Every eye in the gate area was fixed on Marcus, waiting for him to shrink, to step back, to become the stereotype they wanted him to be. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and calmly pulled out his phone. The gesture wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, precise, almost regal. He tapped the screen, held it up to the light, and said in a steady voice, "Before you remove me, you may want to confirm who's paying your paycheck this month." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Confusion rippled through the crowd. A few passengers chuckled nervously, thinking it was bravado. The gate attendant folded her arms, rolling her eyes. But the pilot froze. His expression tightened, suspicion flickering across his face. Marcus scrolled to an email, turned the screen outward, and let the glow illuminate the company logo at the top. Eros Global Enterprises. The name wasn't just corporate, it was colossal. And stamped beneath the header, signed with digital authority, was Marcus Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer. Gasps erupted. A woman covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "He's the CEO?" Phones tilted forward, capturing the revelation. Marcus's voice didn't rise, but every syllable carried the weight of command. "This airline flies under contract with my company. Every one of these planes runs because I approve the deals. And the man standing in front of you, questioning my right to sit in a seat I paid for, doesn't realize he just jeopardized his own career." The crowd shifted, the atmosphere electric now, the power dynamic tilting like a storm breaking open. The supervisor's face drained of color. He stammered, "See, sir, we didn't—" "This isn't—" Marcus raised a hand, silencing him without effort. His eyes stayed locked on the pilot. 12 minutes, Marcus said softly. "That's all it will take for me to ground this flight. Do you understand?" The pilot's jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temple. Authority no longer radiated from him. It evaporated, leaving him exposed under Marcus's calm intensity. And then, as if the universe wanted witnesses, Marcus hit a button on his phone. The screen lit up with a live call, his executive assistant's voice crisp over speaker. "Mr. Reynolds, the board is ready for your decision on the contract extension. Should I proceed with grounding Flight 227 as you requested?" The room exploded with sound, gasps, shouts, the sharp intake of breath from passengers who realized the man they mocked had the power to end their journey before it even began. Marcus didn't flinch. He let the silence hang for one long, dramatic beat, then spoke into the phone with razor-sharp clarity. "Ground it. And while you're at it, prepare termination paperwork for Captain Jameson here, effective immediately." The pilot's face turned ashen, the arrogance gone, replaced by disbelief and dread. Phones were everywhere now, recording every second. The whispers had turned into a storm. He fired the pilot. He actually fired him. Marcus lowered the phone, his gaze sweeping the room. Respect isn't a seat you give or take away. It's earned. And today, every single one of you learned that power doesn't always wear the uniform you expect. The supervisor swallowed hard. "Mr. Reynolds, please, if you'll allow us to escort you to your seat." But Marcus didn't move right away. He let the weight of the moment sink into every corner of the terminal, into every shocked face, into every recording camera that would carry this story to millions. He had endured humiliation, whispers, and open disdain. But now, standing taller than ever, he had flipped the script. And for the first time that day, the crowd wasn't doubting him. They were in awe. The announcement spread across the gate like a shockwave. Flight 227 has been delayed until further notice. Gasps echoed, some passengers groaning in frustration, others too stunned to react. But all eyes remained on Marcus. Just minutes earlier, he was dismissed as an inconvenience, someone unworthy of first-class treatment. Now, he stood as the man who had grounded the plane and ended the career of the very pilot who disrespected him. The gate attendant lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The supervisor stood rigid, unsure whether to apologize or retreat. The pilot, stripped of authority, stormed off down the terminal, his uniform suddenly looking less like a badge of honor and more like a costume he no longer deserved to wear. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the silence. But as the initial shock faded, something else took its place. A ripple of realization moved through the passengers. This wasn't just about one man's seat. It was about every time someone had been judged unfairly, every time power and dignity were denied because of skin color, background, or assumptions. Marcus's stand wasn't just his victory, it was theirs too. One woman, an older black passenger sitting near the window, wiped a tear from her eye. She whispered to the man beside her, "I've been flying for 40 years. I've never seen someone like him stand up like that and win." The murmur grew into something stronger. A young couple clapped softly at first, then louder until others joined. Soon, the gate was filled with the sound of applause. It wasn't for the delay. It wasn't for the drama. It was for Marcus. For the way he carried himself. The way he transformed humiliation into authority, and the way he refused to bow to injustice. Marcus lifted his chin, not smiling, but acknowledging. He wasn't performing. He was reminding everyone in that room, and everyone who would later see those viral videos, that dignity is not negotiable. Minutes later, an announcement came. A new captain has been assigned. Boarding will resume shortly. When Marcus finally walked down the jet bridge and entered the plane, he wasn't just another passenger. The first-class cabin was silent as he placed his bag in the overhead compartment and took his rightful seat. Passengers turned to look, not with disdain this time, but with respect. Some gave small nods, others offered hesitant smiles. A few whispered, "That's him." The flight attendants, who had once avoided eye contact, now treated him with a new reverence, as though they realized they had been part of something historic. As the plane lifted into the sky, Marcus sat back, gazing out the window. The city lights shimmered below, and for a moment, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. Victory wasn't always about shouting the loudest or fighting the hardest. Sometimes it was about patience, restraint, and knowing exactly when to reveal your hand. But Marcus also knew something else. This wasn't just his story, it was a reflection of a larger, painful truth. For every Marcus Reynolds, there were countless others who didn't have the power to pull up an email, ground a flight, or fire a pilot. Countless others who endured humiliation in silence because they didn't have the leverage to fight back. And while tonight's battle had been won, the war against prejudice was far from over. The videos began circulating before the plane even touched down. Clips of Marcus revealing his CEO title, grounding the flight, and firing the pilot spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines followed. Black CEO grounds flight after being denied seat. Power and prejudice collide at 30,000 feet. Marcus Reynolds turns humiliation into historic stand. Comment sections flooded with debates, some praising Marcus as a hero, others revealing the deep divide still present in society. But one thing was undeniable. His story had forced a conversation the world couldn't ignore. When Marcus stepped off the plane hours later, reporters were already waiting. Flashbulbs exploded, microphones pushed toward him, voices clamored for comment. But Marcus didn't give a speech. He simply said in a calm, steady voice, No one should have to prove their worth to sit in a seat they already paid for. Remember that." And with that, he walked away, leaving the world to wrestle with the meaning of his words. Days later, the airline issued a public apology. The pilot was officially terminated. Policies were reviewed, diversity training reintroduced. But the true impact wasn't corporate. It was human. A young boy who saw the viral video told his mother, "I want to be like him one day." An older man who had stayed quiet during his own humiliations whispered to himself, "Maybe next time I won't." And thousands of people who watched Marcus's calm defiance felt a spark of hope that maybe dignity could win. Marcus returned to his office weeks later, walking past the glass walls and polished floors of his company headquarters. His employees rose to greet him, not because he was the CEO, but because he had become a symbol of strength. A man who didn't just lead in boardrooms, but on the front lines of injustice. Sitting at his desk, Marcus reflected on the journey. The seat he fought for was more than leather and leg room. It was respect, equality, humanity. And as he leaned back in his chair, the world still buzzing about his stand, he thought about the millions of others who couldn't yet fight their battles, and vowed silently that his fight had only just begun. Because true leadership isn't measured in titles, wealth, or power, it's measured in the courage to demand respect when others would rather strip it away, and Marcus Reynolds had shown the world what that courage looked like.